Parashah 38. I've entitled this talk The Third Rebellion because it's the third parashah in succession that deals with the rebellion within the camp of Israel. 2 weeks ago, while Israel was on the march from Mount Horev to the Paran desert, we saw how Miriam and Aaron challenged the leadership of their brother Moshe. They were concerned about the fact that he'd taken an Ethiopian woman as his wife. But the real purpose was to ask, is it true that Yahweh has spoken only with Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too? Then last week, we saw how, having reconnoitred the land of Caanan, the 10 out of the 12 spies returned with a bad report saying, we can't attack those people because they are stronger than we are. Having heard their defeatist reports, the people decided that they wanted to go back to Egypt, saying, we wish we had died in the land of Egypt. Wouldn't it have been better to return to Egypt? Let's appoint another leader and return to Egypt. Today's parashah, we see yet another rebellion beginning this time among the Levite. The rebellion is along the same lines as the two previous challenges, both of which were directed towards Moshe. However, in reality, each of the three outbursts were expressions of contempt by the people towards Yahweh. In each situation, the rebellion was targeted at the sociological structure that Yahweh had established for his people. The challenge was the first expression of democracy, which may be defined as being the doctrine that the numerical majority of the organized group can make decisions binding on the whole group. That definition is borne out by the words of Korach when he said to Moshe and Aharon, you take too much on yourselves. After all, the entire community is holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among them. So why do you lift yourself up above Yahweh's assembly? Who was Korach that he should take upon himself to lead a challenge against Moshe and Aharon and directly against Yahweh himself? As Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 16, verse 1 tells us, he was the grandson of Koach, the firstborn son of Levi. Korach, along with the rest of the tribe, had been separated from among the tribes of Israel as servants of Yahweh in the Mishkan. The whole tribe of Levi became what is known as the Leviim, which is a title for the role in the community. Then, from within the Leviim, Aaron and his sons had been set apart for the special purpose of being Kohanim. So we need to consider the differences between the roles of Kohanim and that of the Leviim, because that difference is the underlying reason why Korach started his rebellion. So in pursuing that difference, we need to jump forward to chapter 18, where we see 3 times Yahweh spoke directly with Aaron. Direct speech by Yahweh towards Aaron only happened 5 times in the whole of Torah, whereas Yahweh spoke directly with Moshe 139 times in that same Torah. On each of those 3 occasions in chapter 18, when Yahweh spoke directly with Aharon, he laid down strict guidelines as to what Yahweh expected from Aaron and his sons as Kohanim. In that chapter, Yahweh was setting strong boundaries between the role of Kohanim and those of Levi. The reason the boundaries needed to be clearly defined was because of the rebellion of Korach. There was no place in the community of Israel for the leadership by democracy, or, as we know it today, leadership by the people for and on behalf of the people. Yahweh had set his people, Israel, apart from all the other nations of the world because he wanted a close relationship with Israel that he did not ever have with any of the other nations. But that relationship could only happen on his terms. So looking a little more closely at chapter 18, verse 8, we find that Yahweh is saying to Aaron, I myself have put you in charge of the contributions given to me. Everything consecrated by the people of Israel I have given and set aside for you and your sons. This is a perpetual law. In that one verse, Yahweh was providing for the daily food needs of his Kohanim, all the people, to present their offerings to Yahweh, who in turn set apart most of the contributions for Aaron and his sons and the Levite. It was a unique arrangement. Yahweh, while he dwelt in the midst of his people, always had it that way, but he remained apart from them. Therefore, Yahweh could only be approached by the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, once a year at Yom Kippur. Even then, Aaron himself had to offer the blood of a young bull before Yahweh, and then finally he could offer the blood of a goat on behalf of the people. Returning back to verse 1 of chapter 18, Yahweh says to Aaron, you, your sons, and your father's family line will be responsible for everything that goes wrong with the sanctuary. You and your sons with you will be responsible for anything wrong in the service of Kohanim. Now that was a harsh reminder to Aaron and his sons of the magnitude of their task. They had to ensure that Israel abided by all the regulations Yahweh had laid down in relationship to the Mishkan, the altar, and the courtyard. No human being other than Aaron and his sons were allowed to enter the Mishkan and itself, and Aaron alone was as the Kohen Gadol, could only go beyond the second curtain as required on Yom Kippur. If anyone else dared to enter the outer curtain, they would die instantly. Even Aaron's sons were only permitted in the outer room of the Mishkan each morning and evening to tend to the needs of the menorah. Also, once a week on Shabbat, the appointed Kohen had to place the new showbread and remove the previous batch, which became the bread for those serving at the Mishkan. Moving on to verses 2 and 3, Yahweh says, but you are to bring your kinsmen, the tribe of Israel, along with yourselves, to work together with you and help you. You and your sons with you, when you are before the Mishkan, they are to be at your disposal and perform all kinds of tasks related to the tent. Only they are not to come near the holy furnishings or the altar, so that neither they nor you will die. Moving on to verse 6, Yahweh said, myself I have taken your kinsmen and the Levite from among the people of Israel. They have been given as a gift to Yahweh for me, so that you can perform your service in the Mishkan. Yahweh then concluded his discourse in verse 7 by warning Aaron, I entrust the service required of Kohanim to you. Any unauthorized person who tries to perform such a duty will be put to death. That last command set Aaron and his sons apart from the whole of Israel, including the Levite. As the Kohanim, they alone could approach Yahweh, but only in accordance with the strict conditions that had been laid down. So from the regulations set forth in that chapter, Yahweh was making sure that from that time onward, the people like Korach, who wanted to have a democratic style of leadership in Israel, would never find it acceptable to Yahweh. One last time Yahweh spoke to Aaron was directly in chapter 18, verse 20, where he said, you are not to have any inheritance or portion in the land I am your portion and inheritance among the people of Israel. In that one verse, Yahweh set the Kohanim completely apart, firstly from the Levite also, and also the remainder of the people. Even the Levite had land around their cities and towns. It was only the Kohanim who remained totally devoid of land ownership. As Yahweh said, I am your portion and inheritance. That was the eternal promise. Having concluded his instructions directly to Aaron, Yahweh then spoke with Moshe, again, in chapter 18, verses 23 through 32, where he sets forth how the Levite, who were to distribute the 10% of all that they received from the people's portion, it was to be given to the Kohanim. The Levite were to ensure that the best portions of all the offerings were given to the Kohanim. So all the offerings brought to Yahweh during the 3 agricultural festivals of Matzah, Shavuot, and Sukkot, along with other offerings brought by individuals on specific occasions, were all to be portioned out as Yahweh had instructed. Returning now to chapter 16, we see that while the rebellion on that occasion was instigated by Korach the Levite, he also called upon his neighbours, Datan and Aviram, who were both descendants of Reuben. It appears the unrest had spilled over into other parts of the camp also, because there were 250 other men from Israel, who, in verse 2, were leaders of the community, key members of the council, men of reputation. They joined, along with Korach, Datan, and Aviram, as part of the rebellious cohort. After Moshe had fallen on his face before Yahweh, he challenged Korach and his fellow Levites, saying, in chapter 16, verses 9 and 10, "This is for you a mere trifle, that God of Israel has separated you from the community to bring you close to himself, so that you can do the work of the Mishkan of Yahweh, standing before the community and serving them. Now you want the office of Cohen as well. After all, what is Aaron that you complain against him?" Moshe then concluded his response by ordering Korach and his cohort to appear in front of the Mishkan next morning, so that Yahweh could show all the people whom he had chosen and set apart to serve him. Then he turned his attention to Datan and Aviram and the 250 men who had joined with Korach. Again he summoned them to appear before Yahweh, but they responded defiantly, saying twice, "We won't come up." They flatly refused to join the others in front of the Mishkan. Moshe and Aaron again fell on their faces with Yahweh, and Yahweh spoke with them again, saying, "Separate yourselves from this assembly. I'm going to destroy them right now." Thinking Yahweh was about to destroy the whole community, Moshe pleaded with him, "Oh no, oh God, God of the spirits of humankind, if one person sins, you are going to be angry with the whole entire assembly?" While Moshe was still speaking with Yahweh, he got up and moved the assembly of people away from the homes of Datan and Aviram, shouting, "Leave the tents of these wicked men. Don't touch anything that belongs to them, or you may be swept away along with them in their sins." Once the people had moved away from Datan and Aviram, defiantly stood at the entrance to their tents along with their families, then Moshe spoke up again and said in the hearing of all the assembly, "Here is how you will know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these things, and that I haven't done them out of my own ambition. If these men die a natural death like all other people, only sharing the fate common to all humanity, then you will know that Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh does something new, if the ground opens up and swallows them, with everything that they own, goes down alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have held contempt for Yahweh. The moment he, Moshe, had finished speaking, the ground under them split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, with their households. All the people that had sided with Korach went down alive to Sheol. The earth closed over, and their existence in the community ceased. And fire came out from Yahweh and destroyed the 250 men who had offered incense. Next, chapter 17 opens with Yahweh again instructing Moshe, saying in verse 2, "Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron, the Cohen, to remove the fire pans from the fire and scatter the smouldering coals at a distance, because they have become holy." The remaining men and their fire pans had become holy, or set apart, not in the good sense, but rather as untouchable, because Yahweh had reached out and touched them in a manner that rendered those men who died richly unclean. So next week we will consider the details of the red heifer and the reason why it also had to be reduced to ashes for the ritual of cleansing all those who came in contact with dead bodies. But for now, the fire pans the 250 men had been carrying were to be hammered flat and placed as a cover over the altar. That cover became a constant reminder to the Kohanim and the Levite and all the people who came to the Mishkan to make offerings. Each time they saw the cover, they would remember the horror of the events that took place that day. Doubtless, the message was passed on to subsequent generations of what had happened when the leaders of the tribes had taken their part in the role as Kohanim. If we look back at Bamidbar chapter 12, we see that Yahweh, in his wisdom, provided a means for the ordinary people, man or woman, who wanted to serve in the role assisting the Levi'im in proceedings around the Mishkan, could take the Nazirite vow before Yahweh for a specific period and could serve as assistants at the Mishkan without the risk of being killed by Yahweh. Even with the provision of the Nazirite vow available, the very next day the people in verse 6 once again complained and grumbled against both Moshe and Aharon, saying, "You have killed Yahweh's people." Once again, even though the rebels of the previous day had been swallowed up or burned to death by Yahweh himself, the people still could not contain their contempt towards Moshe and Aharon, and of course, indirectly their contempt towards Yahweh himself. So while the people were gathered in front of the Mishkan, Yahweh's anger flared up yet again. This time, the pillar of cloud which normally stood above the Mishkan descended and covered the Mishkan like a fog. In the midst of the cloud, the glory of Yahweh appeared before the people. It must have been a frightening spectacle, because Moshe and Aharon approached the entrance of the Mishkan and fell on their faces yet again. Because Yahweh had become intensely angry with the contemptuous people, from the midst of the cloud, Yahweh ushered forth a plague that struck the people. While Moshe and Aharon were still lying on their faces on the ground before Yahweh, Yahweh spoke again in verse 10, saying, "Get away from this assembly, and I will destroy them at once." Realizing what was happening, Moshe rose and said to Aaron, "Take your fire pan and put fire from the altar in it. Lay incense on it and hurry into the assembly. Make atonement for them, because anger has gone out from Yahweh, and the plague had already begun. Aaron did as Moshe had ordered, and acted in the role of intercessor on behalf of the people. By running into the crowd between those who had already died and those who were still living, he stood there swinging his fire pan with the smoking incense, and the plague ceased. But not before 14,700 people had died. Once again, Yahweh had confirmed to all his people that he had chosen his own leaders. Once again, the people had learned a hard lesson, that if they expressed contempt towards Yahweh and his chosen leaders, that people would pay an extremely high price. There was no room for democratic governance among the people of Israel. Yahweh made his presence known in ways that he showed the people that Moshe and Aharon were the only ones who could commune directly with him, Yahweh. That message was once again driven home to all the people by what happened in chapter 17, verses 16 through 26, where a dry wooden staff was taken from each of the leaders of the 12 tribes and placed alongside the staff of Aaron in front of the Ark of the Testimony in the innermost part of the Mishkan. The next day, and only one of which had sprouted buds, flowers, and even ripe almonds. It was the staff that belonged to Aaron. Then, in verse 25, Yahweh said to Moshe, "Return Aaron's staff to its place in front of the testimony. It will be kept there as a sign to the rebels, so that they will stop grumbling against me and thus not die." Even after having seen how Aaron's staff flourished, while the other 12 remained as dead wooden sticks, the people still lamented over the situation by saying, verse 27, "Oh no, we are dead men, lost. We're all lost. Whenever anyone approaches Yahweh, he dies. We will all perish." So the whole unfortunate saga drew to a close. The people had realized the gravity of their collective situation. Because of all that, starting with Miriam and Aaron challenging Moshe's leadership, then having become terror-stricken following the 10 unfavorable reports from the spies, and following the rebellion of Korach, Datan and Aviram, along with the 250 prominent men, all whom were destroyed before their very eyes, the people finally acknowledged the degree of contempt that they had collectively shown towards Yahweh and his chosen leaders. The whole community had brought upon themselves a death sentence that would be meted out upon everyone in the midst who was 20 years and older. The death sentence would take effect over the next 38 years as they wandered around the desert, unable to enter the land that they so nearly came to occupy. Next Shabbat, the time span will leap over 38 years to bring the ones remaining from that first generation onto the plains of Moab. We will also see how, because there was going to be so much death occurring over the next 38 years, that Yahweh in his wisdom had provided the ashes of the red heifer as a means by which the people who had come in contact with a dead body could make themselves ritually clean again before Yahweh. So until next week, Shabbat Shalom.